On June 6, 2006, a woman in her 30s, identifying herself only as Judith, walked into the Arizona State Mental Hospital in Phoenix. Calmly, she told the staff she was there to admit herself but offered no reason. She insisted on speaking with a therapist before revealing anything further. Within an hour, she was admitted. The next day, Judith shared her story with a therapist who requested anonymity. Every year, 46,000 homeless people die, yet many vanish without a trace. I know the truth about these disappearances. I was born on June 6, 1906 in Salem, Massachusetts, into a privileged family. Life was stable until the Great Depression hit. I vividly remember the evening of October 30th, 1929. My father came home with a profound change in his demeanor. He was usually lively, but that night he was a shadow of himself. Without a word, he walked straight upstairs. My mother, sensing something was wrong, followed him. We heard a deafening bang that shook the house. I began to cry, knowing even then what had happened. My mother's screams echoed through the house as she called out for my father. My siblings and I were left in stunned silence until Jacob asked me what was wrong. I couldn't respond, only cry. Hours later, we learned that my father had lost everything in the stock market crash and had taken his own life. We were left with nothing, forced from our home. We became destitute, with nowhere to turn. We traveled south to find warmth, eventually ending up in a homeless shelter in Birmingham, Alabama. As the weather grew colder and more people arrived, the shelter became overcrowded, and we were expelled. We took refuge in an abandoned building on the city's edge. My mother worked at a factory, but her meager wages were insufficient. So I scavenged for food and supplies. This went on for months until May 1930. I don't remember the exact day, but my mother came home late and exhausted. She handed me her day's earnings, and I went out to get supplies, unaware of the horror that awaited me. That night, as I walked back with the groceries, I noticed how unusually bright it was despite the late hour. The full moon cast an eerie glow over the empty streets. An unsettling feeling crept over me, causing my ears to ring. I quickened my pace, anxious to return home. When I reached our building, I heard murmurs that I initially thought were my siblings arguing. Lighting a candle, I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor. The sounds of my family's terrified screams pierced through the darkness. Reaching our room, I noticed it was pitch black. As I entered, something struck the candle from my hand. In that fleeting moment, I glimpsed a monstrous entity, something beyond my understanding. The force of the impact sent me across the room, rendering me unconscious. The dreams that followed were nightmarish. I found myself through the eyes of a predator hunting down a young couple. Just as I was about to attack, I jolted awake, only to find myself in the blood-stained room. I searched desperately for my family, but they were gone, leaving behind only their blood. My clothes were in tatters, smeared with dry blood, but I was unharmed. Overwhelmed and paralyzed by fear, I sat amidst the bloodstains, unable to cry or even process the enormity of what had happened. I knew that reporting the incident would lead nowhere, and might even result in my being blamed for the bloodshed. Determined to escape the horror, I decided to leave Birmingham and head to the coast to catch a boat to Europe. The need for food and water drove me out that night. As I walked, I experienced another vivid dream. This time, I was in a bedroom with 2 sleeping children, and I watched myself tear them apart. Desperately, I tried to stop, but my instincts overpowered me. When I woke up, I found myself back in the bloodstained room, wearing different clothes than before. Confused and terrified, I fled Birmingham the next day, reaching Mobile after days of traveling and seeking out a cargo ship to Portugal. During the long voyage to Portugal, I remained hidden in the cargo hold, subsisting on the food and water brought to me by a sympathetic crew member. The journey seemed endless, but eventually we arrived. The crew member helped me off the ship, and I was left to navigate a foreign land alone. My initial days in Lisbon were harsh. I slept on the streets and survived on scraps until I found a homeless shelter willing to take me in. It was there that my life took another unexpected turn. One evening, as I sat eating a meager meal, a man in his 50s, with a thick accent I couldn't place, stared intently at me from across the room. At first I thought him to be merely intrusive, but he soon approached and sat down at my table. "I've never met another one from America," he began, his voice tinged with a strange familiarity. Confused, I asked, "How did you know I'm from America?" "You must have recently changed," he explained. "I could sense it the moment you walked in. I could smell it on you." I was baffled and asked him, "Changed into what?" He inquired if I had experienced an unexplainable attack, to which I reluctantly confirmed. He then revealed a chilling truth, "And now you've become one of us," one of what I demanded. He spoke in hushed tones. "We've been known by many names throughout history. Some call us death, others God's mistakes. But the truth is, we are something entirely different." The realization struck me hard. He explained that the changes I had undergone were only the beginning. He then asked, "When was the last time you were outside under a full moon?" The memory hit me like a wave. I had experienced a surreal and terrifying dream during a full moon in America. The man nodded. "That's a common occurrence when we first turn. You're still learning about yourself, but I can help you understand what you've become." The man, sensing my growing unease, promised to guide me through the transformation and to reveal what I needed to know about our kind. We spent the night walking the streets of Lisbon, where he shared stories and crucial information. He explained our origins, our needs, and our vulnerabilities. Everything seemed like a twisted fairy tale, but the details were undeniably real. He warned me that there were people who hunted our kind, those who would seek to destroy us if they found us. As the next full moon approached, he stressed the importance of controlling our instincts and making our killings untraceable. You must target those who will not be missed, he instructed. Focus on the homeless, those who are already lost to society. Otherwise, you risk drawing the attention of those who seek us out. With that, we waited for the full moon. The night before, we kept a low profile, blending into the shadows of the city. On the evening of the full moon, we stood outside the shelter where the homeless sought refuge. We watched as those who couldn't find space were turned away. We followed one man who wandered off into the darkness, making his way to a makeshift camp far from the city's reach. Once the moon reaches its peak, you will transform, he said, his voice a blend of anticipation and warning. During the transformation, you will have no control over yourself. Your instincts will dominate. Let them guide you. We waited in the shadows, my anxiety mounting as the moon climbed higher in the sky. It's almost time, he whispered. Remember, let the moon give you strength. As the moon reached its zenith, I felt a powerful change within me. My vision shifted, and I became aware of a primal hunger taking over. The man beside me observed his own transformation beginning. As we prepared to hunt, under the full moon's light, the transformation was immediate and overwhelming. My senses heightened, and I became acutely aware of every detail around me. We silently approached the man's camp, where he lay asleep, oblivious to the impending danger. We moved with the stealth of predators, and as the moonlight bathed us in its cold glow, my new instincts took over. In a frenzy of raw, uncontrollable hunger, we attacked. The man's screams were brief and muffled, drowned out by the sounds of the night. Within moments, his life was extinguished, leaving behind only the remnants of his blood and torn clothing. The primal act of feeding felt strangely invigorating, but it also left me with a deep, gnawing sense of unease. This was the price of survival, dictated by the moon's cycle. As we finished and hid the evidence, the man who had guided me observed with a mix of approval and detachment. You have embraced what you are, he said quietly. But remember, each full moon will demand this sacrifice. If you falter or draw too much attention, others will come for you. The night was a turning point, marking my acceptance of this dark new reality. We traveled across Europe and parts of Asia, honing my skills and learning more about our kind. Despite the horrors I committed, my mentor's guidance was a beacon, providing the knowledge needed to navigate this nightmarish existence. 40 years later, I longed to return to America to witness the changes that had occurred during my absence. The journey back was swift compared to the past, thanks to modern transportation. I landed in Seattle and began a decade-long trek down the coast, eventually settling in Phoenix. Throughout the years, I had lost track of many of my victims, their names and faces fading from my memory, except for one that would forever haunt me. Among the countless lives I took, one particular incident left an indelible mark on my soul. I had been tracking a mother and her 2 young children, living in an isolated abandoned house. The plan was to strike when the moon reached its peak, ensuring no one would hear their screams. As I approached their home, I heard their laughter and conversation. For a moment, their joy made me hesitate, but the hunger was overpowering. I entered the house, and the moment the mother saw me, her face contorted in terror. I quickly silenced her, turning my attention to the children. As I was about to kill the last child, I saw his face and was struck by a horrifying realization. He looked exactly like my little brother, Jacob. The resemblance was so striking it froze me in my tracks, despite my instincts urging me to continue. I couldn't shake the image of my brother's face. Overcome by a sudden surge of guilt and grief, I completed the act in a daze. When the killing was over and I transformed back, I felt a profound change within me. The blood on my hands was a stark reminder of my loss of humanity. That night, I made a decision I had been dreading for years. I resolved to end my life, though not in the traditional sense. To die, I had to avoid the very thing that sustained me, the full moon. With a heavy heart, I sought refuge in the Arizona State Mental Hospital, hoping that seclusion from the moon's influence would eventually end my torment. I admitted myself, stating only that I needed to speak to a therapist. The truth was buried beneath layers of trauma and regret, but the act of seeking help was my way of signaling my desire to escape the cycle of violence. Months passed and my physical appearance began to deteriorate. I aged rapidly, each day bringing new signs of the passage of time. The transformation was inexplicable and horrifying, one I could not understand, but which marked the end of my journey. 8 months after my admission, I was found dead in my bed, my body withered and frail. The staff, puzzled by the sudden aging, cremated me, and my ashes were scattered in the desert outside Phoenix by the therapist who had heard my confessions. My story, though hard to believe, was a desperate attempt to reconcile with a past that could never be undone, and a plea for understanding from a world that could never fully grasp the darkness I carried. In the aftermath of Judith's death, her story lingered like a haunting echo. Her confessions, recorded by the therapist, painted a chilling picture of a life bound by an unrelenting curse and a struggle with an identity that defied understanding. To the world, Judith was a mysterious figure whose death brought more questions than answers. The therapist, burdened with the weight of Judith's tale, was left with the unsettling task of processing the narrative. The rapid aging and the eerie transformation, though inexplicable, seemed to fit into a larger, darker context. Judith's story was unlike anything the therapist had encountered, an unsettling mix of personal tragedy and supernatural horror that defied rational explanation. The desert where Judith's ashes were scattered became an unremarkable, desolate place, but for those who knew of her story, it held a grim significance. The therapist, now privy to secrets far beyond ordinary understanding, continued their work with a heightened awareness of the thin line between reality and the fantastical. Judith's tale was preserved in the recorded sessions, a chilling testament to a life overshadowed by an unnameable curse. It served as a dark reminder of the hidden terrors that might lie beneath the surface of ordinary existence, and the enduring question of whether such stories are merely the product of a tortured mind or a glimpse into a darker reality that exists just beyond our grasp. In the end, Judith's final act of seeking refuge in the mental hospital was both an escape and a tragic acknowledgement of a fate she could never truly flee from. Her story remained a haunting enigma, a reflection of the profound and unsettling mysteries that can lie hidden in the most unexpected places. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like our channel and subscribe.